Earlier, you learnt about the broad patterns of patrilineal system in North Indian kinship. Now this unit will deal with broad patterns of kinship in South India. Here too, the main system is that of patrilineal kinship with the exception of matrilineage in the state of Kerala. The patrilineage in both North and South India outlines the major component of kinship system in India, and that is why we have devoted more space to its description. Only at the end of this unit, we have given an account of matrilineal kinship as found in Southwest and Northeast India. In this unit, we will confine to the broad patterns of patrilineal kinship organization that has been discussed by sociologists. We will also give a brief note on the variations found in Kerala. Because of the paucity of space, we will not go into other regional variations. As with kinship system in North India, here too we shall discuss the South Indian kinship system in terms of the following 4 features: kinship groups, kinship terminology, marriage rules, and ceremonial exchange of gifts among kin. Kinship system in South India. Let us first define the area that we will include in our discussion of South Indian kinship system. The states of Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala are generally considered as South India, where the languages of the Dravidian family are spoken. In the region occupied by these 4 states, we find a fairly common pattern of kinship organizations. Like in the north, we find diversity in the kinship pattern in the south too. We must not forget that in this region, the state of Kerala is distinct because of its matrilineal system of descent and the practice of intercaste hypergamy. Secondly, despite common elements, each of these 4 linguistic regions may have its distinct socio-cultural patterns of kinship. Having defined the area, let us now begin with a discussion of kinship groups. Kinship groups. Kin relatives in South India are mainly categorized in 2 groups, namely the patrilineage and the affines. Patrilineage. In South India, just as in North India, relating to various categories of kin beyond one's immediate family implies a close interaction with members of one's patrilineage. The patrilocal residence amongst the lineage members provides the chances for frequent interaction and cooperation. Thus, the ties of descent and residence help in the formation of a kin group. Such a group is recognized in both South and North India. For example, K. Go, in her study of the Brahmins of Tanjore district, describes patrilineal descent groups which are distributed in small communities. Each caste within the village contains 1 to 12 exogamous patrilineal groups. Dumont in 1986, in his study of the Pramalai Kalar of Madurai in Tamil Nadu, describes kin groups in terms of patrilineal, patrilocal, and exogamous groups called Kootam. All members of the Kootam may form the whole or a part of one or several villages. It may be subdivided into secondary Kootam. Each Kootam bears the name of its ancestor, which is also the name of the chief. The name is inherited by the eldest son, who is also the holder of the position of chief in the group. The ritual activities in which the Kootam members participate show its significance as a unit of kinship organization. During harvest season, when food is plenty, all the members of the group are invited and they collectively worship in the temple of the Kootam. In the economic sphere, As land is owned by the male members of the Kutam, we find that after the death of the father, there are frequent fights between brothers or co-parceners as opposed to the free and friendly relations among affinal relatives. Thus, it is said amongst the Kallar that brothers of co-parceners do not joke. Co-parceners are known as Pangali. In the classificatory system of South Indian kinship terminology, they are opposed to the set of relatives known as Mama Machan. More of this we shall discuss later. Affinal relatives. Opposed to the members of a patrilineage, we have the kin group of affinal relatives, those related through marriage. Beyond the patrilineage are the relatives who belong to the group in which one's mother was born, as well as one's wife. They are a person's uterine from mother's side and affinal from wife's side's kin, commonly known as Mama Machan. In this set of relatives are also included the groups in which a person's sister and father's sister are married. The nature of the interaction between a patrilineage and its affines, as described by Dumont in 1986, is always cordial and friendly. Indirect Pangali. If group A is one's patrilineage and group B has one's Mama Machan, uterine and affinal kin, then members of group C, which has Mama Machan of group B, will become classificatory brothers to people in group. Such classificatory brothers are called Muraiku Pangali. These relatives, though called a kind of Pangali, are never confused with actual co-parceners or sharers of joint patrilineal property. Beyond this circle of relatives, the rest are only neutral people. From this discussion of kinship groups, kinship terminology, the linguistic expression of kin relationships in Dravidian languages follows a clear-cut structure with a great deal of precision. Main features of this system, according to Louis Dumont in 1986, are that it distinguishes between parallel and cross cousins, and it is classificatory. Let us discuss these two features, parallel and cross cousins. Parallel cousins are those who are the children of the siblings of the same sex. This means that children of two brothers or of two sisters are parallel cousins to each other. Cross cousins are those who are the children of the siblings of the opposite sex. This means that children of a brother and a sister are cross cousins. The kin terminology in South India clearly separates the two categories of cousins. There are very good reasons for doing so because in South India, parallel cousins cannot marry each other while cross cousins can. If the system of terminology does not distinguish between the two categories, there would have been utter confusion in the minds of the people. But as any speaker of one of the 4 Dravidian languages will tell you, there is never any doubt as to who is one's parallel cousin with whom you behave as a brother, sister, and who is one's cross cousin with whom one is to remain distant and formal. The parallel cousins are referred to as brothers and sisters. For example, in Tamil, all parallel cousins are addressed as Annan, elder brother, or Thambi, younger brother, and Akka, elder sister, or Tangachi, younger sister. Cross cousins are never brothers and sisters. They are referred, for example, in Tamil as Mama Magal, Magan, that is mother's brother's daughter or son, or Attai Magal or Magan, father's sister's daughter or son. The figure you about to see will further clarify this simple formulation. This system of kinship terms is in agreement with marriage among close relatives. It separates all descent lines into those with whom one can marry and those with whom one cannot marry. The terminology clearly tells that in a man's own generation, males are either his brothers or brother-in-law. Similarly, females are either sisters or potential spouses. Perhaps in this very sense, Morgan in 1981 described the Dravidian kinship terminology as consistent and symmetrical. For the sake of comparison, let us clarify that in North India, all cousins, be they parallel or cross, are considered consanguine or brothers and sisters. They are not allowed to marry each other. Then in this respect, you can see how North Indian kinship system is different from the one in South India and how the kinship terminology reflects this distinction. Classificatory nature of kinship terminology. The distinction between parallel and cross cousins combined with the classificatory nature of terminology makes the Dravidian kinship terms a mirror image of the kinship system in South India. The terminology becomes classificatory in the following manner. The person's own generation is terminologically divided into two groups. One group, known as Pangali in Tamil, consists of all the brothers and sisters, including one's parallel cousins and the children of the father's parallel cousins. The other group comprise cross cousins and affinal relatives such as wife, husband of the category relatives. In Tamil, this category is called by the term of Mama Machan. Let us see how the two classes of kin divide relatives in one's own generation and in both ascending and descending generations. One's own generation. This bipartition applies to the whole generation of a person. All one's relatives in one's own generation are systematically classified in this way. There is no third category of relatives. People falling into neither category are not considered to be relatives. The Tamil term for category is Pangali, which means those who share. The word Pangali has connotations of both the general and the specific kind. In its general sense, it refers to classificatory Murai brothers who do not share a joint property. They are all reckoned as Pangali brothers. In its specific sense, the word Pangali refers to strictly those people who have a share in the joint family property. Here we are more concerned with the classificatory Murai connotation of this term. The two categories, Pangali and Mama Machan, are both opposed and exclusive to each other. This classification, which has been explained above in terms of relatives in one's own generations, is applied to groups, lineages, villages, and so on. Let us now understand this bipartition in terms of both the generation above one's own and the generation below one's own. In other words, we will see how the two categories of kin are observed in one's father's generation and in one's children's generation. Ascending generation. Two classes of male kin are distinguished in the father's generation. one class is the side of the father and the other class is the side of the mother's brother. With one's father in Tamil, Appa or Ayya are classified in one group, all his brothers, Periyappa or father's elder brother, Chittappa, Sinnappa or father's younger brother, and also the husband of mother's sister, also termed Periyappa or Chittappa, Sinnappa in Tamil. With the mother's brother, Maman, are classified father's sister's husbands, also termed Maman in Tamil. All immediate affines, for example, the father-in-law, are classed with the corresponding cross relatives, that is, the mother's brother or the Maman. Descending generation. In the generation below one's own, we have again the same principle operating. With one's daughter and son are classified children of one's parallel cousins. In Tamil, one's daughter is called Magal and one's son is Magan. So are one's parallel cousin's children. On the other hand, are placed one's daughter-in-law, Marumagal in Tamil, and son-in-law, Marumagan in Tamil. The children of one's cross cousins come in this category. This has to be so because they are potential spouses for one's children. Age and sex distinction. By separating the older and younger relatives, the ego's generation is divided into two parts. Similarly, the father's generation is also divided into two parts. In Tamil, brothers and sisters and parallel cousins older to ego are called Annan or Akka respectively, and those younger to ego are called Tambi or Tangachi respectively. In the same way, all brothers and sisters and parallel cousins older to one's father are called Periyappa, Periyamma, and younger ones are Chittappa, Sinnappa, Chitti, Sinnamma respectively. The sex distinction is spared, says Dumont in 1986, with the alliance distinction. As soon as a distinction is not necessary for establishing an alliance relationship, it is merged. That is what we find in the case of kin terms applied in grandparental and grandchildren's generation. For the generation of one's grandchild, one does not distinguish between one's sons and daughters' children. Both are referred in Tamil as Peran, grandson, or Peti, granddaughter. Similarly, maternal grandfather, mother, and paternal grandfather, mother, are designated by a common term Tata for grandfather and Pati for grandmother. Merging of the sex distinction in generations of grandparents and grandchildren shows the boundaries where the relationship of alliance ceases to matter and the two sides can be assimilated into one category. The above description of kinship terminology in South India should not give you the impression that there are no variations in this general picture. In fact, particular features of kinship terms in specific regions are of great interest to sociologists. For example, Louis Dumont in 1986 has discussed in particular the features of kinship among the Pramalai Kallar of Tamil Nadu. But here we are concerned with only the general and broad scheme of kinship terminology. Marriage rules. Kinship system in South India is characterized by positive rules of marriage. This means that preference for a particular type of alliance in marriage is clearly stated and practiced. Remember that in the context of North India, we have said that negative rules of marriage tell us whom one should not marry. In South India, The marriage rules are quite clear about who one should and who can marry. 3 types of preferential marriage rules. The preferential marriage rules are of the following 3 types. Several castes in South India, the first preference is given to the marriage between a man and his elder sister's daughter. Among the matrilineal societies like the Nayars, this is not allowed. Next category of preferred marriage is the marriage of a man with his father's sister's daughter. In other words, we can also say that a woman marries her mother's brother's son. In this kind of marriage, the principle of return is quite evident. The family which gives a daughter expects to receive a daughter in return in marriage. In other words, we can say that when an ego marries her mother's brother's son, she is given in marriage to the family from which her mother had come. Thus, principle of return is followed in this type of preference. Often, this process takes 2 generations to materialize. With the help of a kinship diagram, we will see how this rule operates. The third type of preferential marriage is between a man and his mother's brother's daughter. In a way, this is the reverse of what we learned above. Some castes such as the Kallar of Tamil Nadu, Havik Brahmins of Karnataka, some Reddy castes of Andhra Pradesh allow only this type of cross-cousin marriage. In the castes which we have type 3 of preference, there is always an underlying notion of superiority or hypergamy. This is not present in South India to the extent that is found among the bride takers in North India. But in this type of marriage, the principle of no return or a divine must not be returned or a wine must not be returned is practiced, and therefore the bride is given only in one direction. The bride takers are considered to be somewhat higher to bride givers. That is why this rule of no return. Thus, where a man marries his mother's brother's daughter, his family is again receiving a woman. In this context, it is necessary to see what are the restrictions imposed with regard to marriage between certain relatives. For example, in certain castes, a man can marry his elder sister's daughter but not younger sister's daughter. Also, a widow cannot marry her deceased husband's elder or younger brother or even his classificatory brother. Here, we find that for each individual, the prohibited persons for marriage differ. Then, there is, of course, the rule that a person cannot marry in one's own immediate family and one's lineage. The lineage in the case of the Kallar subcaste is known as Kutam. All individuals in the lineage are forbidden to marry persons of the lineage. Ceremonial exchange of gifts among kin. The process of gift giving and taking reflects the principles governing the separation, assimilation of various categories of kin relationships. This is the reason why we look at this aspect of kinship behavior. Gifts and counter gifts in South India from certain persons to other persons or from certain groups to other groups can be distinguished in 2 categories. Gifts passing from the bride's family to the groom's family or the reverse can be seen as a series of exchanges between affines. This is one category of gift exchange. The other category of gift giving and taking occurs within each of the 2 groups. We can call it internal exchange of gifts. It is sometimes possible for a person to make or receive gifts from both sides. Because of the positive rules of marriage between relatives, often certain individuals are placed in the positions of receivers and givers at the same time. In other words, there is a process of merging of relationships. Examples. Let us take up some examples of both categories from ethnographic studies made in South India. Examples of Category 1. Louis Dumont in 1986, in his study of the Pramalai Kallar subcaste of Tamil Nadu, mentions a gift of money from the bridegroom's father to the bride's father. It is known as parisam. The bride's father uses this money to get jewels for his daughter, but he is expected to spend twice the amount he receives. Thus, we may say that the bride's jewels are paid for half and half by the two families. This particular ceremony marks the beginning of the giving and taking of gifts between affines. If continues for a period of at least 3 years, then the birth of the first child gives rise to another cycle of gift exchange. In fact, among the Pramalai Kallar, after 3 years of marriage or after birth of a child, when the newlyweds set up an individual household, the bride's parents provide the household articles. This gift is called Vereponna Seer, literally meaning the gift for going apart. So from parisam to the gift of going apart, we witness the series in which a gift is made and it is returned after doubling its content. The series begins with a gift from the groom's side and ends with a gift from the bride side. Thus, though there is a reciprocity of gifts between affines on both sides, it is quite clear that the bride's side ends up paying more. In other words, gifts from the groom's side are mere excuses for getting more gifts from the bride's side. Having seen the nature of gifts passing from the bride's family to the groom's family, now we also discuss the gifts given and taken within each group of affines. Examples of Category 2. At weddings, both in the bride's house and the groom's house respectively, a collection, usually in the form of cash, is taken from the relatives present at the occasion. This is called the moi among the non-Brahmin castes in South India. The same is practiced by the Brahmins under the name of writing the moi. A person is given the charge of recording the amount of cash kind given by a particular person. In this gift giving also, there is a principle of reciprocity. One gives moi to those who have already given or will give on similar occasions. Louis Dumont tells us that among the Pramalai Kallar, the mother's brother is the first person to contribute to the moi. After the mother's brother, other relatives make their contribution. Usually, the money thus collected goes towards the expenses incurred for the marriage feast. In the cycle of internal gifts, the role of the mother's brother is quite prominent. After a child is born to a family, the mother's brother gives gifts on various occasions in the child's life. Among the Pramalai Kallar, the mother's brother gives to his sister's son at birth a gift of land or money. In a way, we can say that the gifts given by mother's brother are a continuation of the series which started at the mother's wedding. Then we called it an exchange of gifts between affines. Now, the mother's brother, an affine of Ego's father, is merged in relation to the affines in Ego's generation among the common relatives of one group, either of the bride or the groom. Secondly, the special place of the gifts made by the mother's brother points to the obligation the female side has to the male side. This is seen in the continuity maintained by the relatives on the mother's side in terms of gift giving even to the next generation. Element of reciprocity in gift giving. In conclusion, we may say that in the context of kinship behavior at ceremonial exchange of gifts in South India, the element of reciprocity is present, though the bride givers have to pay more gifts than they receive. In comparative terms, we may say that in North India, the gifts travel from the bride givers to bride takers in a unidirectional manner. As a result, the bride givers in turn receive the enhanced prestige and status in their own community. In South India, the positive rule of marriage means that gifts are exchanged among close relatives. There is always the difference in the amount of gifts both sides exchange, but their flow has to remain both-sided. It cannot be a unidirectional as it is in North India. Marriage in modern India. Companionate marriage among a middle-class Brahmin subcaste. The first exogamous marriage probably occurred in the early 1980s. Now, most 18 village Vattimas are prepared to accept other Tamil Brahmins, but normally only if a suitable partner from their own subcaste cannot be found. Thus, the Vattimas provide a clear, if unusual, example of how subcaste endogamy can remain the dominant norm in both preference and practice, even for a group with so many members living in cities or overseas. Although arranged, endogamous marriage still remains the norm. Both ideally and statistically, the mode of arrangement has changed because of the increased importance of the educational qualifications and employment of individual men and women. People assume that any sensible conversation about marriage must also be about education and employment. The prestige rankings for Vattimas are standard ones. Degrees from elite colleges are highly esteemed, and IT professionals and business consultants probably thought to have the best jobs. For women who now marry in their early 20s, the prestige rankings are almost the same. Educated, professional husbands prefer wives who are also educated, though not to a high standard than themselves. Interestingly, middle-class marriage has progressively developed in recent years into a companionate form. Vattimas, like other Tamil Brahmins and many other Indians, now regard the future couple's happiness as vitally important. The concern with future happiness is the primary motive for increasingly consulting young men and women before arranging a marriage and encouraging them to communicate with each other before a marriage is finalized. In this unit, we discussed the main features of patrilineal kinship system in South India. This was done in terms of kinship groups, kinship terminology, marriage rules, and ceremonial exchange of gifts among the kin. Then we noted how kinship systems in the two regions compare in terms of similarities and differences.